Hello and welcome to chapter 5. So I thought I would change up the background a little bit and keep things interesting. So today this chapter is one of my favorite chapters in marketing to talk about. And because it really involves a lot of psychology and understanding how people think, and marketing is really rooted in psychological theory. And so we're going to get to use a lot of that in this chapter, and I really like that. Our case study that we're going to talk about has to do with Harley Davidson. And Harley Davidson is also one of my favorites because this is a company that really has a duplicity going on. On the one hand, they have what we call a marketing personality that speaks to a very young, um, courageous, rebellious, on the fringe kind of brand that consumers find sexy and appealing. On the other hand, their average consumer is actually an older accountant who's balding and a little bit overweight and barely goes out on the road and just takes the bike for a short ride on the weekend. But if they were to put that person in their ad, they won't be able to sell any Harleys, right? Because a huge part of the appeal of Harley Davidson is the fact that it's exciting, it's sexy, it's different, it's rebellious. And so sometimes when we are talking about consumer behavior, we have to think of both the ideal self and the actual self. So what am I talking about? Harley is really putting forward this idea of the ideal self, where you think of this rebel and you think that Harley Davidson buying a Harley is going to make you younger, make you more rebellious, make you more sexy and exciting, as opposed to advertising that appeals to the actual self, like Dove. And Dove came out with their Real Beauty campaign for Real Beauty, where they showcased real women. So the average woman in the United States is a size 12, but the average person that we see in commercials is a size 2. And Dove recognized that departure from what the reality is and what is the picture that a lot of beauty products put in their campaigns. And they really resonated with the consumers because the consumers really enjoyed having a type of role model that wasn't this fantasy, wasn't this ideal self, but in fact was an actual self. So I think what I'm saying here is it all depends on who your consumer is, how you depict your brand, and how you want your brand to be perceived in the minds of the consumer. Because some brands are going to be perfect for actual self and actual personality kind of portraits, and some other brands are going to be really focused on the ideal self. Okay, so let's continue. So you will see in figure 5.1, we have the model of buyer behavior. And the model of buyer behavior is really talking about when consumers are exposed to some kind of marketing stimuli, how do they behave? How do they respond? So we know that that stimuli can be anything. We talked about the four P's, but it can also be economic things. It could also be technological. It can be that we're going through a recession or the corona pandemic, or maybe we have a lot of technological advances. So the internet, think of how the internet has really transformed marketing. Think of how Twitter and Facebook has transformed marketing. Or maybe we're in a political environment where things are different politically or culturally. Maybe, demographics have changed. We have more younger people or more older people. All of these things can really change how we respond to a market and the type of stimuli that is out there in the market. And then as we process all of these things, and I want you to recognize like the average consumer gets over 1,000 marketing images that they see on a daily basis. And so how do we process that 1,000? We can't. So we block out a lot of it. We have like kind of automatic ways that we respond to some of it. And after we filter all of this, we come to some type of buyer decision. We make some kind of decision about what we want to do with that information. Do we want to just put it in the background? Do we want to make product choices based on it? Do we want to make a brand choice? I mean, think of it, right? You might not even be hungry or thirsty, but you see a McDonald's ad or you see Coca-Cola being poured out, and now you're dying of thirst. Now all of a sudden you're hungry. So we make a lot of decisions based on the stimuli that we're exposed to. And then a lot of that is cultural too, right? How I would make a decision is very different from someone who was born and raised in the US. My husband's African American. He makes decisions and processes things very different to me. So we're both black, but we come from very different backgrounds, both culturally and nationally. And that changes how we see things, how we perceive things, how we respond to things. So think of how your immediate culture can affect how you behave and how you respond to different things. Maybe it's a particular type of food that you really like, and maybe other people eat it and they're like, yeah, we don't really like this. Or maybe you buy certain types of clothes or watch certain movies, and other people who don't belong to your cultural background don't understand the value in it, don't see what the attraction is, right? And then what do we do to try to become a part of a group? So maybe we decide. I know when I became a professor eons ago, right? I've been a professor 20 years now. So when I first became a professor, I decided, man, I need to change my clothing, right? I need to get some grown up professor suits, and I went out and I bought a bunch of suits because of that. So that was a purchase that was really facilitated by membership in a particular group. And so we do all kinds of things. Or because we have a family. I know when I got my girls, when we had kids, we decided we needed to change where we live. We were living in downtown Sacramento. We moved to Elk Grove. We changed our car, right? I had a pickup truck. My husband had a sedan. We bought an SUV. So a lot of times, when you change where you are in terms of your family, or when you expand your family, then that also makes you change what you buy and how you buy. Think of things like fashion trends, or even sometimes life cycle. We talked about that. Economic situation. I'm sure when you leave college and you get your first job, then that's going to change how you purchase things and how you respond to advertising stimuli. Because maybe you might be in a situation where you see something, but you're like, I can't really afford that. And so when you get more money, then that changes how you think of things. Or maybe in your profession, it exposes you. I know when I was in TV production, I was exposed to things that I wasn't exposed to before I was in TV production. So that changed how I processed things. It changed how I responded to marketing stimuli and so forth and so on. And so there are all of these things. And Val's lifestyle chart on figure 5.4 really talks about the motivations consumers have, because some consumers may be highly motivated, but then you're highly motivated and you don't have a lot of resources. That's not very helpful. So we also know that some consumers may be highly motivated and have a lot of resources. And so then we target them very differently. Then there's this issue of brand personality, and brand personality has to do with, if I have a brand and I think of that brand as a human being, what would that brand look like? And so we start thinking of, I do this exercise with students in the classroom, and I ask them, think of Apple as a brand. What do you come up with? What race, ethnicity, age, education, income bracket, height, what kinds of clothes they would like, what kinds of hobbies they would like. And students are able to um, explain the brand and describe the human in remarkable ways. And that's all based on Apple dimensions. They say, oh, this person is going to be dressed a particular way because they're looking at the design of the Apple boxes and the design of the Apple products, and they think Apple has a sleek design. This person is going to be sleek, well put together. One student told me hippie. They think of who uses the product, and that also comes into play in terms of how they think of the brand. So I think brand personality is very exciting to people. And for years, companies have used brand personality in two ways, right? They use brand personality to decide, well, what kinds of changes would I make for my brand that maintains my personality? But I also use brand personality to kind of inform who their customers are and what their customers expect to see when they think of this personality. Because a lot of times we attract same, right? So our customers will have similar personalities as ours. So there are five brand personalities as out there: sincerity, ruggedness, excitement, competence, and sophistication. And these are all concepts where a brand may not be solely one, but it may be dominated by one. So when you think of Home Depot, you're not really thinking of sophistication, or you might more think of competence and ruggedness. So it doesn't have to just be one, it can be multiple, but that is the brand personality concept. And then we have this. I remember I started off by saying that there's a lot of psychological literature that really informs a lot of marketing theory. And so in psychology, we know that there are, all of these concepts of motivation, perception, learning, beliefs, and attitudes. And we're going to get into them one by one. So let's talk about Maslow's first. So Maslow's hierarchy of needs really looks at how consumers process their needs. And what we know is that when you have some very basic needs that are unmet, you cannot process higher level needs. So, in the initial, if I'm hungry, don't speak to me, right? Because I'm hungry. I can't really process that I'm not all that I can be, because right now I'm just thinking about it. I'm super hungry. So, you have to satisfy your most basic needs. But then beyond that, you go, so once you satisfy things like hunger or thirst, then next you can think, okay, now how can I be safe? So if I am, dying of thirst in the desert, I'm really not necessarily thinking about the fact that, man, I really wanted to be a geologist one day, right? That's not coming to mind. What I'm thinking about is, man, I need to get something to eat. I need to get something to drink. Probably thirst more than even hunger. So you have to satisfy your physiological needs, and then you can now say, okay, I need safety, I need protection from the elements, I need housing, etc., etc. Then I start thinking of a sense of belonging. Once you've satisfied those two needs, then it goes to social needs. Then I start thinking of self-esteem and recognition and status. And then last but not least is self-actualization. So we know when we are thinking of how we can advertise to a consumer, if we tap into these needs, that's very effective. But we have to know what kind of consumer and what need level. What point on the hierarchy are we going to really try to focus on? So another theory that I find very fun, and I really like to kind of teach it, is this idea of perception. And why is perception so important? Because we all can be exposed to the same things, but see totally different things. And why is that? Because we're paying attention differently, we're processing differently, we're seeing things based on our own experiences, and those differ. We're retaining differently, and we either comprehending ultimately and remembering differently. So let's talk about each of those factors, right? And I always say, let's start with, here it starts with selective attention, but you want to take a step back. It actually starts with selective exposure, because consumers are not all going to be exposed to the same things. Some consumers will be exposed to one set of stimuli, and other consumers to a totally different set of stimuli. So let's say I'm driving down the road and my husband and I are in the same car, and we're going down the same, so obviously we're driving down the same street. But I look up and I see a billboard. He had the same opportunity kind of to see the billboard, but he was driving, so he didn't pay attention to the billboard. We were both exposed to the billboard, but he didn't pay attention. But what if we were never exposed to the billboard to begin with? So the first step is selective exposure. Then you go to, am I paying attention? So, it's like you're watching a movie with somebody, and you turn to them and you say, what did that person say? And they're like, I have no idea. Because even though you were both watching the movie, that person wasn't paying attention, and neither will you. So we screen out information and process information very different depending on what we are encouraged to pay attention to, what we are motivated to pay attention to, etc., etc. The other thing that we have to think about is this idea of, once I pay attention, then how do I process the information? So we think of selective comprehension, or another way to call it in the book, they call it selective distortion. What it means is that I perceive everything based on my past experiences, right? So if I see a particular dog coming towards me and I have had bad experiences with that dog, I'm going to think they're coming to attack me. Somebody else might have had perfect, wonderful experiences with that dog, and they think the dog is coming to hug them or play with them. And so we perceive things differently depending on our own experiences. And that means that we really have to know who our audience is if we are to come up with commercial and come up with marketing stimuli that they are all going to perceive in a correct way. Because what you don't want is to put an ad out there and then your consumers perceive it completely different from how you intended for them to receive it. And then last in this group is selective retention. And that means that we remember it differently. So you and I both see the same ad, and I remember the first part, you remember the last part. So people, consumers don't remember things in the exact same way. So that's also something to be aware of. And so you have to think about, what is it that you want your consumers to remember, and how do you think you can get them to best remember the things that you want them to remember? So as you are creating commercials, as you are creating marketing stimuli, then you have to have certain cues. You have to have things that reinforce the ideas that you are talking about. You have to have calls for action in your advertising, and that's going to really help you to come up with advertising that's going to be most effective and most successful for you. Now, the other thing that we know is we know that beliefs and attitudes really drive behavior. So, there's this theory in marketing and in psychology where we look at some Freudian kind of Freud based cues that drive behavior. And we know that basic initial kind of base belief systems really drive what we want, kind of how we will behave. They drive how people will respond to something, and they drive how people will develop an attitude to something. So if it is that I'm a Christian, then that may affect how I feel about abortion. It may not, but it may, right? And so sometimes beliefs can drive attitudes. So to use a non-controversial topic, maybe if I grew up thinking ice cream is good for the soul, then I have the attitude that we eat ice cream and it's a joyous thing when we eat ice cream. Well, somebody else might have grown up and thought about ice cream. We only eat ice cream when we're depressed. And I grew up every time they brought out ice cream in my house, people were depressed. So that might mean that I have a different kind of attitude altogether about when I would eat ice cream and why I'm eating ice cream. So I think this idea, this relationship between beliefs and attitudes is also very important, because sometimes we find it's harder to get someone to have a particular attitude when their belief systems drive them towards a negative perspective on that attitude. Now, keep in mind that as an advertiser, there are different types of buying decision making, right? Behavior. So, if you are highly involved in a product, and what we mean highly involved means typically they will say high involvement has to do with high purchases, but that's not always the case. Sometimes high involvement just means that I'm very excited, um, deeply involved. So, I'll give you an example. I am super involved in laundry detergent. Now that seems crazy, right? But the idea is that I buy laundry detergent in ways other people buy houses. I have a different set of laundry detergent for my whites, for my colors, for the kids' clothes, for me, my husband's clothes, for special occasion clothes versus regular clothes. I use fabric softener and something, those dryer sheets. I'm obsessed about laundry. And so that's really high involvement behavior. And then it might be that there are a lot of differences between the brands of the detergent that I buy. So that would be complex. But what if, I have some students that are like, Professor, I just buy the detergent that's on sale, and it really doesn't matter what I'm washing. I just wash it the same way. Then maybe there's a lot of differences between brands, but they are not involved in that at all. Or maybe they don't perceive a lot of differences between brands, and so they just buy whatever is on sale, and that's how they buy. Or, some people will tell me, I just buy whatever my mom tells me to buy. That's what I buy. So it all depends on if you perceive a lot of differences, if there you think there are big differences between the brands, or if you don't think there's a lot of differences, or you're not involved. Typically, if we're buying a house, then it's a long process. We think of a lot of different things before we make the decision. But some people buy a house based on the fact that it has 4 bedrooms and it's in this neighborhood that I want. We're good to go. Not a big decision. So, it's a big decision, but not a big decision making process. So, what we know is that consumers go through these 5 stages of a decision making process, right? They start off recognizing they have a need, then they search for the information, and that can be all kind of different ways. Then they evaluate the information that they've come up with, make a decision, and then hopefully they think of that decision in a positive way. So, for example, need recognition. Now, you can recognize that you have a need by maybe something that happened internally. Maybe your stomach grumbles, so now you know you're hungry. Or maybe you saw that ad for KFC, and now you know you're hungry. Or maybe it is something that you've been thinking about for a while, or an ad you saw on TV, and now you know. So it can be internal or external. You're also going to look for information in different ways depending on what you're looking for, depending on how you're accustomed to looking for information. So it might be that you look for personal sources. I know I really value people's opinions. So I'm always asking someone, I prefer, even when I read reviews, I prefer to get information from a person I know. So that's a personal. Some people like to get commercial sources. They look at a commercial and they say, oh, that's a good idea. I like that. They give me information. Or sometimes people read up what's in the newspaper, or they read reviews, not just from people who've used the product, but from experts. Or maybe they try it out themselves and they know it's good because they've had experience with it. Or maybe they got word of mouth from a neighbor or a friend. So all of these things give us information. And then what we do with that information, we evaluate. We look at all of the alternatives. I know when I was buying my SUV, man, I looked at so many cars. Test drove so many cars. And so you evaluate all of those things that you looked at, that you processed, and then come to a conclusion. And then, boom, you make a decision. And companies know that there are things that they can do to help you to make a good decision, or to help you make decision they want you to make, right? So maybe they may have a sale, or offer you options to pay it over a long period of time, or maybe they have a buy one get one free, or right, you get 20% all off. There are all these different things that companies can do to kind of facilitate the purchase decision. And then there's post purchase behavior, where you buy something and you get into your house and you're like, damn, why the heck did I buy this thing? I really don't need this, right? And so we all have garages, and our parents have garages filled with things that we no longer need, one we never even opened. And so what is that? It's what we call cognitive dissonance. I thought I wanted this thing, turns out I didn't really want it, right? And so cognitive dissonance is the reason why there's always a line at Costco, because people are bringing back things that they really had no business buying in the first place. So when you are thinking of buying something new, or companies thinking of rolling out a new product, there are things to be aware of, that consumers process new products in different ways, right? And so there are these different stages in the adoption process, from when I become first aware of of the product to when I actually adopt. And so we go through all of these stages. So we start off with, okay, I just heard about this product. Or and then we would go to things like, oh, I'm interested. Is one, because there's a difference between awareness and interested. I might know about a product, but I have no interest. So then you pique my interest. Then I have to evaluate whether or not, an evaluation and a trial, they go kind of hand in hand. Might make a decision about evaluating a number of alternatives, and then I try one of them, and then I try another one, and then I make a decision on which one I want to adopt permanently. So we know that there are all of these different kind of stages in the adoption process, and we understand that consumers adopt things in different ways. So they're the innovators. Those are the people who, as a new iPhone comes out, they are standing in the line overnight waiting on the release. I have no idea why they would even want to do this, but those are those people. Then there are early adopters. I think I probably fall in that category, where we just want to hear that the bugs are out, right? And then we don't mind buying it early and being an early adopter to the technology. I like tech. I try to adopt early tech, but I'm not an innovator because I'm not prepared to deal with it just as it comes out. Then you have the early majority. Those are the people people who, okay, they're not gonna, they don't buy it in the first year, but then after that, they are happy to purchase it. Then you have the late majority, which they want all the bugs to come out before they buy it. They're not feeling comfortable until they know this is the second or third release. And then you have the laggards. Those are the people that in 2020 are still using a flip phone. God bless them, right? And so the idea is that as you are releasing a new product, you have to think, who's my consumer? Am I going after innovators? Am I going after early adopters, early majority, late majority? Is my group a laggard? I saw an ad focused on seniors where, they still have flip phones and they're like, we don't really need anything fancy. We just need to be able to call our grandkids. And so that is an ad where they recognize their consumers are laggards. So in addition to that, though, you have to think about what are the characteristics that would naturally lend your product to the idea of adoption. So maybe it's relative advantage, which speaks to what is the relative advantage of this product over that of the competition, or how complex is this compared to, no, not relative advantage of this product over the competition, relative advantage of this product over the previous model. And that might sometimes be the competition, but not necessarily, because I may not want to buy a new iPhone because I don't think there's any purpose with this because it's the exact same iPhone as the last version. Or how complex is this product to use? Am I going to have a high learning curve or a low learning curve? How easy is it to try it out? That's the idea of divisibility, that I can try it out easily. There's a 30-day trial. I can get my money back if I don't like it. Or is this compatible? Am I going to have to get a new charger, or I can use an existing one? And then how easy is it to communicate what that changes, what that difference is from the previous model? And the thing is that if you are not able to communicate difference, then why should your consumers purchase it? So those are, that's the basic gist. I went over all of the slides for consumer behavior. I hope you enjoyed it. I gave you certain examples. Remember to always read the text because you need to support. I'm just giving you an overview of the slides, but continue to read your text so that you can confirm and kind of concretize in your minds the concepts we discuss here. See you in chapter 6.